Welcome. We're on the red couch with Adele Myers, choreographer and dancer with her own all-female contemporary dance company, Adele Myers and Dancers. Before forming her own company, her extensive background includes associations with Urban Bushwomen, Momix, and Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. Adele Myers and Dancers received a 2012 National Dance Project Production and Touring Award and is currently embarking on their 7-city tour with their evening-length work, Einstein's Happiest Thought. Adele, I am thrilled to have you on the red couch.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, what is the difference between play and dance? And what was your journey from play to dance?
Honestly, I don't see a whole lot of difference between play and dance. For me, it began with rolling on red oil drums down a hill, just the sort of physical sensation of being in control, of being out of control, liking to have sort of tasks that could barely be accomplished, but done with a sense of humor. And I'd say that is what completely infuses the work that I do today, is that it is play, but now I'm a grown-up and people take it maybe more seriously.
Well, I love that you don't see a big difference between play and dance.
No, I don't. I love that question, actually. It's a great question.
Thank you. Well, so there's really no difference between play and dance, but you've gone from being a dancer in choreography to owning your own business, because a dance company is a business.
Yeah.
So how has that transition been, and have you been able to still maintain the play in that as well?
That's I find it very enriching to learn how to value this work from behind the scenes. So while I have been dedicated and, obviously in love with the creative process,
Right.
to learn what it takes to run a company, to build and run a company, has taught me a lot about building infrastructure, looking at the role of what I do within the rest of our culture, and frankly, in some ways, taking it more seriously. So while it is play in a certain way in the creative arena,
Right.
it is a job. It is work. And I think for a long time, I didn't take it like that. I loved it so much, I thought this couldn't be my work.
Right.
But really, it is. And bringing that level for me of professionalism to it is. It just sort of it seals the fact that this is something that I'm in and am able to do for a lifetime.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge difference to be moving into the idea of being an adult and being don't even consider myself an adult.
Right. Right. No, I know what you mean.
But to have that business mind as well.
Yep.
So to be a dancer, to own a company, and to be raising a family is quite a lot. How do you manage that whole package?
The key word is manage that you just said. Maybe I'm just a micromanager, control issue. We have control issues, so it works in all these arenas.
We all do.
Right. So I think there's just something about being able to, you have to be organized. You have to look at the chemistry of a situation and make sure it's being organized and planned in a correct way. Being persistent, having a support system. Being honest with yourself about what you can handle, but also, I hesitate to use the word committed because I've just been in this life as a dancer and a choreographer my whole life. So it's not even I'm committed, it's just part of my life. So there's never a chance that I'm not going to make this work. I'm going to make it work. And make it work means to continue to enjoy it, to continue to be challenged by it, to make sure that I'm equally present with my family as I am with running this business, as I am with being in the studio, and making sure that that balancing act is something that I am staying very aware of on a heightened basis. And it shifts. As all of these shift and grow, I have to be willing to shift with it also. And also not feel like I have to have too much control over it.
Well, it's a nice progression how you've grown, you've continued to grow.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are people that haven't had any dance experience and then just take dance for the first time. So you've been on the faculty at Tulane, at Connecticut College. You were telling me a wonderful story about a young man that took a dance class pretty much just for the credit.
Right.
Would you share that?
Yes. So I taught this class at Connecticut College in the dance program, where I was an assistant professor for several years. And I taught a class that was a gen ed requirement, and it was called Movers and Shakers.
That's a great name.
Well, that's what I just ended up calling it. And it was an introduction to dance class. And one thing that I did in the class was I would teach some movement to the students, but I would also give them a very preliminary idea of what it means to build, to choreograph a dance, but then also to have to perform it. So, with that comes the rigor of rehearsal and repetition. So right before they did a showing, and it was usually either theater students or male and female athletes that were in the class. And right before they were doing a showing for about 70 students, and some of their coaches were there as well.
Wow.
This young man came up to me and said, I don't know. I don't really like the way that I'm feeling right now. I feel sort of nervous, like more nervous than I do for the basketball game that I play in. I don't know, what do I do? I was like, oh, okay, just breathe. You'll see. It'll be fine. Okay, and so they do the performance. They killed it. Everybody was up on their feet. They were howling. Because they were so committed to it. It was great. And then he came off afterwards and he said, I really like the way I feel right now. I really like the way I feel. And so he said, I just never knew how much went into what you do.
Wow.
And as an artist or as dancers, and I have so much more respect for it. And it feels an awful lot like what I do when I'm preparing as an athlete. It feels really similar. And then he went on to take more dance classes and ultimately went toward becoming a dance major.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you were the main influence on him, but he himself had never had experience, and now he's a dance major.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think just behind the scenes, some people make assumptions about what dance is. And I began as an athlete more than I did as a dancer, so track and field events. And I feel that I relate to dance more as an athlete in some ways. Just the raw physicality. And perhaps that is something that spoke to him. And often that's what would happen with athletes that would come to the class. And their coaches would start to send them to me for cross-training. Because a lot of what we did physically mirrored what they were doing on the field.
So what would you say to someone who wasn't confident about themselves dancing? Or someone who just really wanted to maybe go for it, but didn't feel confident and was nervous about it?
I'd say I would really want them to take one of my classes, to be honest, or take a class where they feel that they can be themselves and they don't feel like they have to have something perfect, right or wrong, compare themselves to others. These are all the things that make folks self-conscious about it. But if you go in there and you have a sensation that makes you feel good, you have a good time, you feel like you are in some ways finding a certain physical freedom, I think that's it. I think that's what bites people, is when they can feel the sensation of it's pushing yourself. It's knowing that there's a certain rigor to what you do. It feels good to have exercise. You get the adrenaline and all that. But I think once you're stung, you're stung. And so I feel that it's just finding any kind of physicality. And it's not always just dance. Right? And I think it can also just be movement. If you want to take a capoeira class or Tai Chi or come at it with any kind of a point of entry that is movement and then move into a class. I just feel like it's the doing it first. And once you do it and you feel it, that is, in my experience, working with folks, that's where they get it.
Taking the first step.
Yep.
And actually getting into a setting where they can practice and have fun.
Right. Yep.
And be themselves, hopefully.
Yeah.
So what are the benefits of dance, whether you are in the audience or you are a dancer yourself? What are the benefits of including dance in your life?
The benefits of including dance in your life.
It's a very big question.
It is a big question, but I think as an audience member, what dance does, if going to see a dance performance, you're allowed to make your own interpretation of what's in front of you, right? With language, it's not to say there's not spoken word and movement, but if we're just talking just movement, you can make your own interpretation of something. There's also an empathetic relationship, an empathetic physicality that we have as observers. So you're watching someone, say, flying through the air. There's something subconsciously where you feel that you're almost having that sensation as well, right? And so there's a connection there, even if you're not necessarily aware of it.
Right.
But it allows you to think in a way that could be broad and not necessarily so specific, where sometimes with words, you know, being allowed to interpret is limited there, right? There's also recognizing personally the amount of discipline that goes into being a dancer, intellectual, physical, emotional, prepares you for just about anything in your life. And I would have several students when I was at Connecticut College whose my colleagues would say, it's always the dancers that have totally different ways of thinking about the subject matter, of how they articulate it, of their dedication to the work they bring. They just don't know any other way than to do it full out.
And are you that kind of, are you the type of like a kinesthetic learner, someone who learns through how you move and how you feel in your body?
Yes, I do feel that I am, but I also feel like I have to understand it. If I understand the mechanism in front of me, whether it's a conversation or a dance class or any sort of social situation, once I understand it, I know how to navigate it. To know how to understand it means I need to pay attention. I need to observe. I need to process what I'm observing or hearing and find what is my role in this particular situation. What do I have to offer? What do I have to gain? And I think that can apply to life and the discipline and persistence, because you know in this field you have to love what you do in order to persist.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
so having what you feel truly fulfills you as your governing impetus, I mean, it's endless what you feel that you can accomplish and do. Absolutely.
I love how you were talking about overcoming the fear of heights and falling. And can you talk about how you brought that into the piece that you're working on now?
Okay. So you're referring to Einstein's Happiest Thought. And in that particular work, I was thinking about the idea of falling or flying. And in order to do that for this project, it's an interdisciplinary project, right? So we had a filmmaker, a visual artist, a composer, a dramaturg, 4 dancers, another performer that I'll explain what she did in a minute, and obviously myself as the director and the choreographer. And I asked everybody to launch the project by going to trapeze school in New York City, because I wanted us all to start with a sensation. And this word sensation keeps coming up, so clearly that's a driving factor. I wanted us all to understand this idea of falling or flying, but not necessarily jumping out of airplanes. And I have a fear of heights, but I also have the same idea where I'm also fascinated by my own fears. I don't necessarily want to overcome them, but there's that push-pull there. And so I thought, okay, so let's all go through this. And here we are, we're on the top of a building in downtown Manhattan. Here's your skyline, the infinite, sky, beautiful blue sky and the clouds. And you're climbing up this 25-foot ladder. And you jump off of a perch, you fly through the air, you come down off the net. And when all of the collaborators and I met afterwards, we all said the same thing, that it was the climbing up the ladder that ultimately was the most terrifying, because it was the anticipation, right? Not the moment when a total stranger is saying, okay, lean out off the perch and there's 25 feet down and here's like sort of, the horizon.
Wow.
Not that moment, because you can trust yourself there, but there's just something about what's going to happen. It's that state of what I like to call wonder doubt. Right?
Oh, I've never heard that word.
You're wondering what's going to come
next. The combination of words.
But, the what if that comes with that. What happens to your heartbeat when you're in that moment? What happens to your sense of time and space? And ultimately, I am afraid of heights. And I also tend to be the person, however, because I'm a thrill seeker, so it doesn't really make any sense. But I'm the one who, if somebody says, who wants to jump off the cliff? I do, but I have to do it first, and I have to do it now. I can't think about it. But that's also, I would say, I run my life in the same way. If there's something I'm afraid of, I will probably, unless it's really dangerous, I'll probably run straight to it. Because if you become afraid, I'm afraid if I start to become afraid of those, I'll become afraid of more things.
Right.
Versus if I go for it, I'll probably be willing to go for more. And so I guess it was trying to look at and force myself to actually sit in the anticipation of that fear, of the risk. And what do you gain there? Why was I always rushing through that part? Why not actually make the challenge sitting there with that sensation and perhaps asking the audience to do the same? We don't like to do that, right? We don't like to wait.
Right, so it's like creating within the audience that same feeling of, oh my gosh, how would I feel if I were that woman climbing up the ladder?
Yeah, empathetic, kinesthetic response from the audience. They're very much, that's to me how the interaction happens. Getting them to connect, yes, emotionally, but physically, you know. Yeah. And there's a 16-foot ladder on the stage. Wow. There's a woman who crosses the stage and climbs the 16-foot ladder throughout the duration of the work. And ultimately, she's the marker of time and space. She's holding a bright yellow rope. And you know, of course, it goes here across the stage, but then as she goes up, it goes all the way up. And you've got this beautiful, it almost looks like a neon light that disappears into infinity, you know, off the stage. You don't know where it goes. And so there's the sense of the timelessness and the spacelessness of when you're at this moment of anticipating a risk, your sense of time and space and your place in it, it alters. And so that's what I ultimately did with my fear of heights.
It's amazing. It's incredible. It reminds me of, it's the same kind of principle, and it's a ladder, climbing up the ladder of the high dive at the pool.
Right. It's the same, and I was that kid that ran up, jumped off, while the other person's standing there, and you're like, jump, are you crazy? What you're doing is so much harder. Just go for it.
Right, right.
And you have to trust yourself. And I think the thing about this one work, the woman who's climbing across, there's also these 4 women, and I refer to the dancers in Adele Myers and Dancers as female athletes of the heart. Because the way they attack space and launch through it, but they do it with such phenomenal abandon, and they're so present in what they do. And they, to me, were representations of what was happening within this one woman crossing.
Right.
Right? It was her emotional sensations, her physical sensations, her thoughts.
I can feel it just as you're describing it. I'm not even seeing it.
It's hard for me to watch it, frankly. It's really hard to watch, and not in a bad way, but I feel that they are so captivating, the performers, and it does set up this tension wrought with a lot of complexity that to force myself to continue sitting in it is still an interesting challenge. Yeah.
So have you gotten feedback from audience members that they have had this empathic, kinesthetic feeling, that they're kind of holding their breath watching?
Yes. And one of my favorite is actually sitting in the audience, because I'll sit next to folks, and it's different with generations. I'd say folks who were, you know, adults would say, wow, I just found that mesmerizing. You gave me enough time and space to really reflect on what was happening without too much bombarding me. Right. But at the same time, within that sparse environment, there was so much happening that I actually had to sit within that sensation. And sometimes I realized I had caught my own breath. And at the very end, I was like, oh, gosh.
What a relief.
Yeah, you know, and so there was that, but then there's some of, when there's sort of younger adults or younger folks in the audience, and they're shifting, and they're just like, oh my God, something needs to happen. And I thought, this is really interesting, our own relationships to time and space and waiting, and generationally, how that is dealt with, because these days there's so much going on. There's a constant fix, there's constant stimulation.
Right. But the act of actually climbing up a ladder yourself, or the high dive or whatever, that still remains the same. You know, you can still relate to that person's.
Yep. Right.
How are they feeling? This is how I'm feeling. So it's very powerful.
Well, and there's also a woman in this same work who, there's a bright yellow 4-foot ladder. And there's a woman who perches herself on top of this in a very precarious way, but with such strength and clarity that too would be where people said their hearts would pound. Because at the very end, she steps up on the ladder and she begins to, throw her arms around and around and around. The way the lighting design is, you have these huge shadows reflected on the wall of this woman doing this, and you see from the side she's doing this on top of the 4-foot ladder.
Wow, right.
And there you hear like, is she gonna jump? Is she gonna do a flip? What is she gonna do? Because you've seen her do such marvelous things. What is she going to do? Is hanging in the air. And then I can't tell you what happens, because that would ruin it. No. That would ruin it.
I wouldn't ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think about how dance is a part of every culture that I can think of in the world, has been since the beginning of time. How do you think dance connects us?
Well, my gosh, we all dance. We all have our own versions of it. I mean, what just popped into my head when you were saying that is I was thinking about, my husband would kill me for this, but I'm going to do it. I'm just going to say it. Sometimes he'll do this like little haiku dances in the kitchen. I mean, and
it's very endearing.
Well, where did this come from? But he's doing this, right? Or my kids, while they're eating, they do that like, this is so good, this is so good, this is so good. Or like you hear some music and you move. It's everywhere, right? There's a vernacular in movement in what we do in everyday life. You put it onto the stage, it becomes something else. But we're all movers. We all do it. And I just feel like there's such a freedom you can eventually have with your body. I think our culture is very prudish about, especially the female body, but we can't even get into all that. And I find, male or female, if you are a dancer, you just have a certain confidence of how you move through the world.
Right. Like a comfort in your own skin type of thing.
I mean, yeah, there are many cultures where dance is embedded in the form of celebration, communication,
ritual,
everyday life, and you can see the comfort of the confidence, is what I should say, of their bodies in space. And so I think, as someone who has that, I can say it's really a wonderful asset to have.
It also sounds like you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that we can expand our definition of dance so it's not so kind of narrow and limited into these little boxes of this is dancing, right?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think that's why I called that class Movers and Shakers.
I love that title.
Because, and I still feel that maybe it's my favorite class to teach, Movers and Shakers, because it's just, I mean, what are athletes doing on a field? When I watch those football games, it's like, come on, you just put some music on, that's choreography. And then there's spectators sitting in the seats, that's your audience. Right. To me, there is no difference.
Right. Well, I think that actually opens it up for those of us who think we're not dancers,
Right, yeah.
So you've had an incredibly extensive career. You have your PhD. I mean, we could just go on and on. The intro could have been quite a bit longer. But as you look over your career thus far in your life, what would you say is your secret to living a happy and successful life?
Honestly, making sure that I'm enjoying it.
Well, it really looks like you are. You're amazing. I'm enthralled by your company, and I love the work you're doing, and I wish you all the best with this tour.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the Red Couch.